We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely enormous.
Oh yeah, dude. There's some Nephilim shit.
It's like we all know what's going down, but no one's saying shit what happened to the home of the brave. These motherfuckers, they're controlling us now, and no one's talking about how they made us fight to be slaves. And everybody's just walking around, heading the clouds, and wanna wake up to a dead in the grave. But then it's too late, we need to be ready to raise up. Welcome to the end of days. Everybody is slaves, only some are aware that the government released.
Welcome back to another episode of Nephilim Death Squad. I am David Lee Corbo, a.k.a. The Raven. That is Top Lobster, the father of disinformation. And today we are joined by our guest, Jeremy Slate. We're going to discuss a bunch of topics ranging from maybe some Nephilim shit, but all the way to the Roman Empire. But before we get into that, Jeremy, can you please let the people know a little bit about what it is you do and where they can find your work?
Well, thankfully, I read a YouTube comment only 10 minutes before this conversation, and luckily I had this scheduled, so I didn't have enough time to end my existence, as the commenter suggested. So I'm stoked to be hanging out with you guys today. I run a PR agency called Command Your Brand. We focus on podcasts and new media. You can find us at commandyourbrand.com. I also have a master's degree. I like to say in the Roman Empire, but it's actually in the propaganda of Augustus, and I say Roman Empire so people understand that a little bit better. But I studied this in school, gosh, almost 15 years ago now, and then all of a sudden on TikTok, people started thinking about the Roman Empire. My wife's like, honey, you're relevant. I'm like, I thought I was relevant yesterday. I'm more relevant today.
Like,
and it's been quite a year, man.
Me with for the last 10 years, honey. You can now talk to somebody else about. And I feel like...
Hey, trust me, man. She loves it. We go to a museum or to Italy because, like, so we're going to the Natural History Museum on Thursday, and, like, they're going to love it. Like, these are the times they appreciate me.
Do you talk to random people, like be like, that's actually not true, like in the museum?
No, I don't like. So I don't like doing that because like gym culture has been a big part of my life, and people like that annoy the hell out of me. They walk over like, if you change that angle just a little bit, you'd be doing it the right way. And I'm like, so I'm not a big fan of that. And I will tell you, it has happened before. I've ended up last time we were in Rome. So this is like 5 or 6 years ago, I ended up unintentionally doing a free tour. Like it just kind of happens, like where I'm explaining something to my wife, and like the old couple with curly hair next to you starts slowly moving over towards you. You know, like the old lady curly hair where they have like the fro going on. They start slowly moving next to you, and next thing you know, there's another group slowly moving next to you, and next thing you know, you have a tour of 10 people. That has happened before.
Start charging. You got to just be like, all right,
No, that's when
$5
you
if
have to
continue.
start. You have to start defending yourself. You're getting into turf wars with other tour guides and shit. Like, hey man, you're not welcome in these parts.
I had no intention of being a guide, man.
That's cool
It's like,
though.
I'm
I like the way that
an
works
tour
out.
guide. I swear, put the knife away.
Is it often, Jeremy, that if you're out there and you're doing that, do you hear them missing the mark?
Yes and no. Because I don't know. Like, I think part of the problem with history is a lot of history is perspective, so it depends on whose opinion you're reading or what information you're reading, because most history you're reading is, as much as people want to say it's based in fact, unless it's something happened in a certain year, a lot of it's opinion. And I think that's, if you look at political figures like Julius Caesar, he's vilified throughout history, and he was kind of just a man of his era and a better politician than the rest of them. So it's very interesting to get viewpoints on history.
Yeah, I mean, think about, you're on Twitter, so what we look at is history, and what got me interested in being a voice on Twitter or just doing anything was like, I'm watching them write history and I'm like, but that's not quite true. And that's in real time. So imagine, we're talking hundreds of years ago, the facts have been lost probably right off the bat. So who the hell knows what happened? And then there's this alternative history, or I don't know if you delve into that kind of stuff. Would you consider
dude,
yourself?
I have read some stuff. I'm a big Eric Von Daniken fan. I'm a big fan of, oh gosh, what's his name? That was from the Dallas Morning News. Jim Mars. A lot of his stuff is really, really good. So I've read some stuff, man.
I like Von Daniken's take on things, even though I feel like he almost ruined his brand going into the Ancient Aliens side of things, only because there was a time when Ancient Aliens might have been something that was very compelling, and it certainly was when it first came out. But since then, they've just beaten that brand to death, trying to keep the series alive. Yeah. And I think that Eric Von Daniken's association with it might be a little bit to his detriment. Although, you know, if you start to grab his books, you realize, like, oh, this guy is a legitimate researcher and a pretty impressive mind when it comes to the ideas that he has surrounding ancient obscured history. But
I've read his books, by the way. I haven't like consumed any. Like, I don't really know anything about the television show other than that guy Giorgio with the crazy hair. That's about it.
Yeah. I mean, it was a fun show. You know, at the height of Ancient Aliens, it was a good show to get into, and it was interesting, some of the ideas that they were exploring. But I think they just started to reach to every possible thing they could to call it, you know, aliens. This was created by aliens. That was created by aliens. And I don't know what season we're in.
What you're describing is this show.
Literally this show.
This show, but the Nephilim. So we're
Exactly. I have a friend like that, though. Like, you'll get into a long discussion with him, and it's like Democrats, Republicans, aliens. Like, you get there, and you're like, I see how you did that. I'm actually pretty impressed.
It's not a far jump. It's actually a little bit of just a skip. It's like right there. But I wanted to ask you.
I have a question.
Fine.
In throughout the Roman Empire, has there been any folklore or tales of alien interference with any of the leadership? Because we have all the way back to, I think, like Abraham Lincoln saw aliens. There's like folklore like that. So it's like might have happened. Not sure, but do you know anything about that?
So I guess you have to look at their viewpoint on the world is different, and they live in an age when, you know, gods walked among men, right? And a lot of that comes from the Greek viewpoint. The Greeks kind of saw gods actually walking the earth as more of a thing, like, hey, you might run into Hercules. The Romans, that doesn't really become as much of a thing for them until like around the year 100, so like around the 2nd century. You start to get a lot of the Greek culture that comes into Rome, and that's called the Hellenization of Rome. The Greeks wouldn't have called themselves Greeks. They would have called themselves Hellenes. So that's really more of what you're looking at. Like, you know, hey, this chick slept with Hercules and had a kid. But they wouldn't have seen aliens, as far as I know. Once again, if there's somebody else out there that has information about that, I'd love to hear it. But I haven't seen that in anything I've read.
Well,
yeah, oh, go ahead, Top.
Yeah, I mean, the alien thing is, to our, I guess, what we think of it is as a rebranding. So, you know, the people back then would not have seen the aliens because
that's the point I'm making.
Yeah, they're presenting themselves to us, obviously, in a technological way that we need to understand. But for them, it could have been more of a truer form. Like, you know, Hercules, in our opinion, would have been the Nephilim. He's the product of a half man, half god, right? Demigod sort of thing. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what the Nephilim is. It's a product of the fallen angel, a female human being, and then you get this half god type of thing, which manifests itself in as giants and, you know, whatever kind of folklore you like to think about the Raphael.
The overlap, the overlap is actually tremendous, because in so many of the ways, like, I know that Zeus in Greek mythology would have transformed commonly into an eagle. I believe there's even precedence. I don't know if it's in the story of Perseus and the time that his mother was visited. And I know this is Greek mythology, but obviously there's a lot of overlap.
I have a little bit of that. I named my daughter after a Greek god. So
very cool. Which one?
Persephone.
That's a banger of a name.
It's a beautiful name too.
It is a beautiful name. But there's even this story. I believe he appears to Perseus's mother as a swan, and so when you have like the transmutation or the transfiguration from, you know, this sort of humanoid-looking god into an animal, this is the same attributes that the fallen will display. So it really is the same story. You know, I won't get into it too much, but spoiler alert, for those who haven't watched The Watchers, there is this element where they're talking about fairy lore in this film. This is a new film that appeared recently. And as you're watching this, you can see the exact same story told just from the point of view of, I guess, what would be Celtic culture. These entities that even bear image to the fallen, in the sense that they're like these angels of light with wings, and they have offspring with human women, and those offspring are a different species. It's the same thing. You see this repeated throughout history. But I often wonder
the whole idea of the Anunnaki, right? Like that's
yes,
you know, Enki and all that stuff. How they actually, you know, breed with humans and everything.
Yes, and the Anunnaki has a different kind of So a lot of these stories, they remain really parallel to the truth, I think, but they deviate in very important factors. And I think that's because the best lie is one that maintains as closely parallel to the truth as possible. But where the Anunnaki deviate in a way that I think is very damning if you should adhere to this ideology is that they created us and that we're essentially a slave race who at one point was used to harvest gold to suspend in their atmosphere because their planet Nibiru or something of that nature. I know this is really Zachariah Sitchin's interpretation of it, but it just paints us as a slave race instead of something that they were actually jealous of, created by God, and then rebelled against him and have been essentially our mortal enemies for some time. It's a pretty clever twist if you want to demoralize people.
Well, it's a good story too, though. I enjoy a good story.
It's a great story. It's a great
banger
story.
of a story, man.
What
it's
do you
almost
think?
like the idea of global warming, right? Like it's this story that the climate is changing, but then it's kind of like this one lie that deviates you into some destructive behaviors. And you had messaged me before something about global warming, right? Climate
It's a really
change.
old lie, man. Because I'm a big believer that climate goes through cycles. I'm not a climatologist. I don't have, not a biologist either.
Well,
But
to interrupt, Jeremy, isn't it not even a matter of belief? This is just what happens. We can see that we go through ice ages and things of that nature, right? So it's this is a thing that constantly is in flux.
well, because even in the Roman Empire, it grows. Because they're good at politics, they're good at conquest and things like that. But they also have a really good situation going on the planet at that time. It's called the Roman climate optimum. So about the year 200 BC to around the year 400 AD is when they say the end of it is. So we kind of cross the Jesus line in the middle there. But it really starts to go downhill around 180 AD. But what happens during this time period is they can grow a lot more grain. So they can feed a lot more people. And in the Empire period, so the Republic period ends around 31 BC, but from the Empire period, which is 31 BC to 476 AD, they have Egypt as a place to get a lot more grain. What would happen every year is the Nile River would flood the delta, and then the delta would dry out and be a great place to grow new grain. So that was actually how they fed the whole empire. You start to have climate change happening around the 180s, and the price of grain is doubling, tripling, and going up. So then you have in, I think, 248 or 249, somewhere around there, there's this emperor named Decius. And he gets a little freaked out by this because they also have barbarian invasions and other stuff going on. So they say, you know what? We're going to start mandating everyone sacrifice to the gods. That'll make the climate get better. And so, you kind of have your first carbon credits. No, just kidding. You have your first idea of, we think that we can change this just by, sacrificing the gods in this way.
That's actually terrifying that you made that joke because it's when you said it, I was like, funny. And then I said, oh no, that's not funny at all because it's exactly what they're doing. Like the idea of a climate credit is they're almost trying to kill a certain amount of a population with whether it be with taxes or if you think about like the extrapolated long-term damage that they would do with something that detrimental, it results in human death. So I wonder if that is like their crossover of a human sacrifice.
Well, the question that I always have, because I know a lot of historians will talk about people of the Roman era or whatever in a certain way, that you always ask yourself, well, do the people in power actually believe this? Like Caesar at the kind of the turn of the Republic and the Empire, he holds an office called Pontifex Maximus, which is the top religious office in Rome. And there's a lot of thoughts, well, does he even believe this? So you have to be curious, like just like the climate police nowadays, do they actually believe what they're foisting upon you, or is it just another control mechanism?
The Pontius Maximus thing, isn't that more or less the first instance of the Pope?
Well, the Pope takes that name because what ends up happening is in the 280s, the empire is not really doing so well. So Diocletian creates this system called the Tetrarchy. It breaks the empire into 4, which is actually going to solidify into about a 2 in East and West. And a lot of the verbiage he uses during that time, like diocese, which comes from his own name, or pontiff, some of these different words that he uses are actually words that as the empire starts to fall and the church kind of transitions after that, they're going to borrow a lot of that verbiage because it would be verbiage people understand. So Rome doesn't really have a separation between spiritual and temporal. And you're going to see that in how a lot of the, I guess, early formation of like how different dioceses are set up and the verbiage that's used. But I don't necessarily know if it's like, the emperor's handing off the keys to the pope and being like, go at it, man.
It's funny, isn't this guy, like, you want to talk about an ego, right? Which certainly you have to have one to be in that sort of a position. But to go, I'm going to make the word thinking. I'm going to introduce mine. Like, pontificate sounds like it literally is derived. He's like, thinking is now, yeah, but it's only done through me. Like, that is, I want to be associated with thinking. He literally made a word about that. But I see this parallel that you're drawing, right, between climate change, even the idea of inflation, right, because the cost of grain is going up. We have this even the reintroduction of sacrifice, which to some extent we're in the middle of right now. We might start to see that happening again when it comes to the red heifers. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but
I'm not super familiar, but I know like we're looking for it at some point. When we find it, like good stuff will not happen.
Yeah, I mean, they've essentially found it, allegedly, but they've put it under wraps because I think the media got too hot. This became a really hot-button issue, especially after the Hamas hang gliding situation where they said that there was an element of the red heifers having been discovered that drove them to this attack, among other things. But this was something that they said on television. And so, you have a lot of these elements returning, and right now we have this meme, right? This, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And I find memes fascinating because the reason they catch fire culturally is because they resonate so deeply with us culturally. And there are a lot of things, I suspect that this has a lot to do with sort of the fall of the Roman Empire and the many ways in which it mirrors, modern day issues. And I wonder if that is the reason that people are paying attention. That's the reason so many people are thinking about the Roman Empire allegedly on a daily basis. But I wanted to get your thoughts on that, especially when it comes to the sudden rise in the cultural significance of, Rome, the Roman Empire.
Well, what's really surprised me, and because I thought very similar to you in the beginning of this, the more of these conversations I had, I just found out people they know absolutely nothing about Rome. That's what I found out, and that's been very surprising to me. Like what they know is from watching Joaquin Phoenix in the movie Gladiator. Like
it's a good movie, dude.
It was a great movie. I'm a little concerned about watching the next one though, because it kind of looks like Training Day in Rome, and I'm a little worried that's the direction they went with it.
Yeah.
But the thing that's been surprising to me is that people actually know very little about Rome. And what I've found is, to me, after having these conversations, it feels more like people are reaching for something, because they feel like, I guess, number one, and I was talking to Sam Tripoli about this, I feel like there's not really a place for men in society anymore. You're told, being masculine isn't such a good thing. We need equity and we need all these other things. You can't just go earn something. And I think people look at the Roman Empire and they see it as a period of time when conquest was still a thing and expanding was still a thing and adventure was real. And to me, that's actually what I see of like the social zeitgeist is people looking for something else, because this what we're doing right now just feels like we're not really going anywhere. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, a lot of those same people are looking at they're looking at Hitler, things like that, like Nazi Germany. I was like, that wasn't so cool either, guys. Like maybe we could look at something else that didn't end up, with Dresden firebombed.
Yeah,
they're looking for a way out. It's kind of sad.
And do you suspect at all that there's a cultural engineering behind that? Because it just seems like, you have this demoralization of men, labeling masculinity as being toxic. Really, the last 5 to 7 years, probably actually more since the Obama administration, once they introduced kind of political correctness into our sphere of awareness, it's really been men and their traits are less desirable for a society. And then you have this thing that's on the horizon. Top just alluded to it. You have a lot of Hitler appreciation, a lot of certainly the memes surrounding the Roman Empire, right? And kind of the culture around. I think even this idea, like Stoicism came back in a huge way over the last Stoicism. I'm sorry. There's not a word that I won't butcher. that came back in a big way. I think I even have like musings by Marcus Aurelius. I've never read it. But there are these things that have been ingested or injected into the culture, and they seem to be a direct response to the things that were being subdued, in the way of masculinity. Do you think that there's a cultural engineering aspect to this? Is this done on purpose, or is this all just a natural cycle or reaction? Maybe it's just what happens when you get to the point of a society that has a disproportionate amount of wealth. There's a contrast, right? I think that's one of the things that we see in Rome too, is like decadence, and then also the destitute and the poor. That separation of I guess status is very dramatic today, and I think it might have been very dramatic in Rome. Do you think that there's a cultural engineering aspect, or is this just natural?
That's tough because I can kind of see it both ways. And if you look at it, I think one of the major things in the U.S. is our education system has changed dramatically over the past 100 years. And it changed really around the Industrial Revolution. If you want people that can work in factories, could do menial jobs and things like that. Earlier on, a classical education would have included Latin. It would have included learning the history of Rome, or included learning great speakers. And we really just don't do that anymore. It's not even approached. So I think if you have to look at it from that perspective, well, that's definitely concocted. Like someone decided that at some point in time, we're going to stop teaching these things. So you have to really wonder, and that's kind of around your Rockefeller era in time, right? Like when a lot of this stuff starts changing is during the Industrial Revolution. So you have to wonder if it's kind of kept away as like a knowledge you're not supposed to have to understand of, like what people have done before, what they've created before, and it's kind of just been an experiment we've been going on. Because if you look at even history now, we're getting rid of Thomas Jefferson, we're getting rid of these different things because people that don't have a history, they live in an endless present. And if people don't have a history, you can tell them what their future is. There's a Rage Against the Machine song I'm trying to remember now. What is it? Who controls the past controls the future. And then so it's very similar to what I see us going through. So if you don't know the experiences we had before, it's very easy to do them to people again.
Even if you do know, you just mentioned Rage Against the Machine. It's kind of amazing. Like they were aware.
They're raging for it now, man.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Honestly, they might be at the point where they're so aware, where they're just like, you know what? I'm just gonna take the fucking money, and that's it. And I don't blame them. Them.
Yeah. I do wonder if there's this element of, we've been talking about the pressure cooker. So if you suppress these things, and you hide history from people, and you tell them they can't talk about things, you can't express masculinity, things of these natures, you're really just creating a pressure cooker. And what I wonder is if we're going to see a disproportionate rebound once people break out of the pressure cooker.
Well,
once these topics hit the mainstream
like an
conversation.
overcorrection, you're saying? Like an
Yes, an overcorrection is exactly what I'm saying.
What did this look like during the Roman Empire? Because I feel like that might be our best guess at what would happen.
From what perspective?
The fall as it was falling. Like
so I guess that's tough too, because what most people have been told about the fall, once again, really isn't. It's not a fall. Like Rome really just fades out in the West. In the East, it goes for another almost 1,000 years. It falls in the West in 476, and in the East doesn't fall till 1453 to the Ottomans. So it takes a very long time to get to that point. But if you look at Rome, the 3rd century is really when the 3rd century being 200 till about the year 300 is when Romans thought their world was ending. They had just come out of a massive plague in the late 2nd century called the Antonine Plague, where about 10% of the empire dies. You have this need for military to basically control everything, because what's happened, as you mentioned Marcus Aurelius, he's the last of what's called the 5 good emperors, and they had a policy of taking the most qualified person around them, adopting them, and then naming them their successor. They would do it with a full adult, which is a little bit weird, I guess, but they'd be like, hey, this general is now my kid, and he's going to be the next emperor. And that happens for 5 emperors. It's a pretty successful pattern, and you have actually a very stable empire during that period. He changes the pattern, and he names his son, Commodus, not Joaquin Phoenix, to be the next emperor. And Commodus has no interest in ruling. He wants to be a gladiator. He wants people to love him. So he wastes a lot of the Empire's money. He's fighting in the arena every day, but he would do it from a platform because he's a little wimp and he didn't want to actually like threaten his own life. And in 192, there's actually several attempts to kill him because they hated him so bad. The first, they try to poison his wine. They give him too much poison, and he ends up throwing it up. And the second, they actually have a wrestler, believe it or not, named Maximus, strangle him to death. And that ends up being the end of Commodus's life. And from that point forward, you have a lot of upheaval in how the actual like succession of emperors goes.
You can't just brush over that. So they had a wrestler.
Yeah.
Choke him to death. Was this in combat or was this like in the street?
No, that like he had just thrown up all this poison and he hadn't died from it. They're like, hey, wrestler, come here. Let's strangle the guy to death. So it wasn't like
right after, like in succession.
right after. Yeah. So it's like the second assassination attempt.
Damn.
So he dies.
Crazy.
And he's one of only 2 emperors, by the way, to have his body drugged through the streets and then thrown into the Tiber because they hated him so much.
Oh, wow.
And after that point, you have the what really changes is how the succession of emperors is after that point. It's a dramatic change. You have what's called the barrack emperors, barrack meaning military barracks. And what would happen is an army would declare their general to be the guy in charge. And it's kind of comical when you think of it because you would have to wear purple, so they would take all their flags and sew them together and be like, hey, this guy that kind of looks like a pauper is our new emperor. But whoever had the most military power then would be the next emperor. So you actually had these guys with armies claiming to be emperor fighting each other in the whole 3rd century. So you have, in that time period, somewhere between 40 and 50 guys claimed to be emperor.
Oh, wow.
And that what ends up happening then is that you have 2 problems that this is going to create, right? You've just lost 10% of the empire, 40 years before. So you have less troops. Well, what do? You import them. So what ends up happening is they start bringing barbarians had always served in the Roman army, but in a special portion of it called the auxiliary, not in the main legions. What they actually start doing is importing barbarians, the Germanic tribes and things like that, into the Roman army because they need more people to fight. So your army starts to become less Roman. It's whoever has the most coin to pay them. So then what ends up happening is these generals start adding other metals to the coins. Copper, tin, whatever it might be, so it creates inflation. So now you have people coming across the border to serve in the Roman army and to bring their families with them, right? Because they're not just coming by themselves. And you are inflating the money to now pay these people. So by 284 AD, you have 15,000% inflation. And what you're going to have too is by 410 AD, you're actually going to have Alaric, who's a Visigoth and had served in the Roman army, take his army of Visigoths and attack Rome. So they kind of create their own problems through that 100 years of continually bringing in more people, putting those people in the army, because the people in power, they only cared about their own power. They didn't care about the effects they were causing. And at the same time, emperors in the 3rd century were living such a short period of time. They were just trying not to die.
We're seeing that same thing now.
Making
You're
a
talking about
strong argument for racism. That's all I heard, right?
Well, what he's talking about, this idea of immigrants coming over the border to serve in the military and they're bringing their families. We just had that as a proposition recently. I don't know if there was any movement as far as legislation goes, but to have these illegal immigrants serve in the military. And so there's just a lot of ways I'm hearing that you're describing where I'm going, man, we're certainly repeating history. And I know that that's an old trope. History repeats itself. But I wonder what you see as somebody who's got a much more intimate relationship with this history. What do you see in regards of the repetition? But actually, before we answer that question, I just want to run a quick ad from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by the Van Man Company. If you're like me, then you're constantly trying to avoid products that contain harmful chemicals, especially when it comes to skincare and hygiene. From fluoride in the toothpaste to aluminum in the deodorants, avoiding these products can become a full-time job. That's why we're excited to team up with the Van Man Company to bring our listeners a solution. The Van Man Company offers a range of incredible products, like their Miracle Tooth Powder, made from natural ingredients like peppermint oil, ancient sea salt, and baking soda. And the best part? It's 100% fluoride-free. They even offer an aloe mouth rinse. Or how about their tallow and zinc sunscreen, made from ingredients like organic olive oil, organic beeswax, and 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef tallow. And there's more. With products like tallow and honey soap, coconut and magnesium deodorant, and peppermint beeswax lip balm, you can't go wrong. From head to toe, the Van Man has you covered. Listeners of this show can use promo code Nephilim at checkout to receive 10% their entire order at vanman.shop, or you can click on the link in the description below. That's promo code Nephilim, Nephilim, for 10% off your entire order at vanman.shop. From head to toe, the Van Man has you covered. Guys, go support the Van Man.
I hate our fans because I'm reading the comments here and I'm just
They're
cracking
unhinged.
up. These guys like,
There's something wrong with every one of them. Get in my van.
You mix a mean ad. I just want to smear tallow all over me now.
That's right. Try that beeswax lip balm. So to just reiterate the question, it was like you're closer to this situation than a lot of, you're talking about people that don't really understand the Roman Empire, but are constantly memeing it and talking about it. I'm one of those people. I don't constantly meme it, but I don't understand it. I can't really claim to. I wonder what somebody who actually does understand it sees in the way of the way it mirrors what's happening today.
Well, I think history rhymes in a lot of ways. I don't think it exactly repeats. I don't think it's like that map in the mall that's like, you are here. What, I'm next to Sears? How did I get here? It's not like that. And if you read my YouTube comments, apparently I know absolutely nothing and I should just die. But when I
offended by this guy, so stop.
Dude, people are just mean. I'm like, why do you sit that long? Like you wrote a paragraph. You need a life. But I think the thing that's really interesting is if you look at, because Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, I think it's 7 volumes. It's way too long, written in 1776. It's the thing everyone talks about how Rome declines and falls. And he comes up with 200 different reasons about why they fall. But if you really want to simplify it, there's pretty much 2, and that's immigration and inflation. And if you look at what's happening in America right now, I think in the last 3 years, we've had 8 million people we estimate come across the border. That's pretty extreme, man. And we're inflating our money like there's no tomorrow. And if you look at what happened in the Weimar Republic, if we ever lose our currency being the standard everyone uses, then we're in big trouble, man. You're not going to be able to get to the supermarket with enough money fast enough to actually buy that loaf of bread by the time it's not worth as much as it was by the time you got there. And I think that's what you have to really consider is things feel all right now. Sure, we're not at 15,000% inflation, but extreme and hyperinflation happens the same way bankruptcy does. A little bit and then all at once. And I think that's what you have to really consider is you build yourself over time into the situation, and then one day your chickens come home to roost, man.
I think our empire is a little luckier to have some kind of technology on their side because they might be able to really pull this off if they could dupe us into a what's that called? Like a crypto coin, but a Fed coin kind of thing,
Yeah.
But the Roman Empire didn't have computers to do that, so they were just staring down the barrel of a gun, I suppose.
Yes and no, and that's why I've been trying to get Clint to actually do an episode about Roman money, because I think if you understand what the Eastern Empire does, it's actually really interesting. I've been reading a lot more about this recently, and Constantine is what you would consider to be the first Christian emperor, and he's emperor in the East, though he would have rolled over the full empire. And if you would ask a Roman, they're living during that time period, what do they appreciate most about Constantine? It wouldn't be anything to do with religion. It would be that around the year, I think it's 313 in Trier, Germany, he takes and he mints less than 100 gold coins, 24 karat pure gold coins, and he mints them. So what does he do? He rules, I think, till somewhere around 330-ish, off the top of my head. He mints a few coins every single year until the year he dies. So what ends up happening is by the time Constantine dies, the Eastern Empire has went from a fiat system to a gold standard. And that gold standard is going to last from when Constantine dies in the mid 330s till around the year 1000 without inflation. And I think that's what you have to consider is he saw this problem and he saw how to fix it. And that's why he's different than someone like Diocletian, the famous reformer of the 280s, because he's a military man, Diocletian. He's going to try and do everything with blunt force. So what does he try and do? He tries to do some price controls. Oh, I think we just heard a person running for president talk about price controls recently. it doesn't do very well, and it actually drives inflation farther. And it also creates a very vibrant black market because now people want to trade for goods and not government currency. So I think Constantine is intelligent enough to realize it's the value of money that's creating this situation. And, I don't really know as much about the East border policy as I've been trying to read more about the Byzantine Empire recently. I'm really focused more on what you'd call the standard Roman era, though the East would have called themselves Romans. But the big thing he does is standardizing the currency, and they last till 1453.
We talked a moment ago about how it almost feels like history is repeating itself or it rhymes. Do you think that this is a notion that I often feel compelled to entertain, is that they're looking at these empires throughout history and they're almost treating them like a playbook? There are certain elements that you can implement that will be effective when it comes to destroying an empire. And a lot of people suspect that there is a controlled demolition, for lack of a better term, happening in Western culture in America. And if you take the idea of Yuri Bezmenov, right, this generational warfare where espionage doesn't happen with spies in a cool sort of James Bond fashion, but more it's a generational takedown that starts with the eroding of the people's faith in their various institutions, their religious institutions, medical, military, their scholarly institutions. And you could very much make an argument that we've gotten there in the past 10 years, that maybe this is the fruits of someone's labor to try to diminish the West. And it just kind of looks, to me, it looks like they're just pulling from a playbook.
Well, I don't know if you guys know Charlie Robinson, but that's a big part of what Charlie talks about is the controlled demolition of the American empire. And I think it is very similar because even you guys familiar with Cloward and Piven, like the strategy of basically overwhelming the welfare state, and that will actually bring down a system.
Yep.
One of the things that people don't talk about that often is Rome had a lot of social welfare programs that were actually super expensive. The main one is the grain dole, and every person in Rome below a certain income level would be given grain on a basis to be able to actually feed their families. And what's going to end up happening, and that's why when the price of grain is doubling and tripling, that's a big problem, because the biggest purchaser of grain is the Roman government.
Right.
So what ends up happening is as the cost of grain is going to go up, well, that's now going to drive inflation even harder, right? Because now they have to pay double, triple, whatever it might be in order to feed people. And that's something that gets instituted before the empire is even an empire. It comes around the year 133 under these two brothers called the Gracchi brothers. And they're actually, the Senate is so angry with them, they pull legs off of a stool and kill the first one, Tiberius Gracchus. And then the second one, Gaius Gracchus, is actually going to be run out and have his body thrown in the Tiber about 10 years after that. But they start this social welfare system in Rome, and it becomes a really big pull on the treasury, but also entertainment as well. Because if you look at now, like you have the NFL and things like that, those are private businesses. In Rome, a lot of those entertainment sources would be paid for by the state. So you have under Vespasian, in around the year 78 or 79 is when the actual Colosseum is built. It would have been called the Flavian Amphitheater during his time. But that takes the gladiator races and chariot races had always been a big part of Roman culture, but they get exponentially larger at that point, right? Because now you have this giant place to fill, and the Circus Maximus is growing, where they have chariot races. So that just the pure scale of this stuff gets larger. So now you have emperors wasting money because they're just spendthrifts anyway. They're wasting money on entertainment. They're wasting money on grain. That's where the idea of bread and circus comes from. They're wasting money on grain and entertainment. They're wasting money on the military. Well, you haven't even paid for a lot of your regular stuff yet, and you've burnt through all your currency. So that's the problem you have to think about. And if you look at America, you have a lot of our welfare programs are absolutely destroying, our currency, right? Because we what is it, by 2035 that Social Security is supposed to not have any money left because it's a Ponzi scheme anyway. And apparently, like, if you're in government, it's cool. If you're a private person, they're going to get you. But like that's the problem, and nobody talks about the welfare part of what's draining the Roman state.
Now, in your opinion, because for this to happen in America, for me it feels like it's contrived. in the Roman Empire. Are these just circumstances, or like they were dealt a bad hand with a certain king and that's what happened? Or are there external influences that are actively doing this to Rome? Because I feel like that's the case for us.
It's a combination of things, and I think that's why it's hard to say it's one thing, because you have to understand in 117 AD, the Romans stop major conquests, meaning they're not going around really conquering territory anymore, and they try to just preserve what they have. And that's how they were allowed to have a lot of this opulence and stuff like that, because they were continually conquering new territories. And early on, when Romans conquered you, they weren't going to be like, all right, you're part of our territory now, pay us taxes. They would conquer you and say, great, provide us troops, because this is going to be how we would conquer new territory. So when they stopped doing that in 117, you have less of a supply of military, but you also have no more wealth coming into the country. You look at the Flavian Amphitheater. That money came from Vespasian when he was one of Nero's generals conquering Israel, and that's where a lot of that money comes from. So you have to look at, once they stop doing that, they're not bringing new wealth into the country, because that's how Rome continued to grow.
This idea of this sort of grain-based welfare system, every family gets enough grain, should be a cautionary tale to those who think that universal basic income would be a good idea, right? I mean, it's the same thing. It's just spread to a currency instead of a commodity like grain. But right now,
that's a really good point, too, because I know Julius Caesar, when he becomes dictator in 44, or 46, sorry, he dies in 44, he goes through this list of reforms. And the first of those reforms is he actually pardons all the people that tried to kill him and later will kill him. Then he reforms the calendar. But another thing he does is he actually puts in a better system for the grain dole, because what was happening before it is people were, messing with different things to get more grain, or one family would know somebody and they get more grain. So you have early on people kind of work in the system.
Which is pretty much the case with any welfare system. We see that constantly in America. It's almost as if the system is designed in such a way as to be easily taken advantage of.
So it seems like so far we've got diversity, welfare, and war. But do you think that the war that the Roman Empire was actually like the war that they were causing was part of their own defeat, or you think they should have continued warring? Is that what you're saying?
Well, and first of all, you guys have like the best commenters.
They're insane.
This guy Star Crimes is hilarious.
Yeah,
Star Crimes is the man.
If you've been reading everything this person's been writing, it's hilarious.
I love Star Crimes. I know him.
But the thing I would say is, if you look at it, I don't like war. I don't think it's a good thing. But if you look at Rome, it's a war society, and it's the Punic Wars when it becomes an empire that actually militarized Rome so much that now it just is eventually going to become an empire. So I think that the problem is, without war and without conquest, Rome doesn't exist. It's different, and that's why if you even look at the Greeks, Greece was never really a united territory. It was a bunch of cities and polises, right? It was a bunch of little areas, and if the Persians were going to come in, they might unite and then hopefully, beat them, but then you might have one of the cities betray them. Whereas Rome did things as kind of this giant gargantuan, Leviathan, where they were always in the same step. And I think that is the difference in kind of like how even the two countries expand.
I think that we would be, if we don't touch on somebody said it, the sodomy aspect, that is one of the ways many people...
How did we jump to that?
We're jumping straight into sodomy.
It's not
all right.
Well, so the big knock on Julius Caesar, by the way, is that he was a bottom.
There you go. Hey, if you're gonna engage in sodomy, you better be the top. So there is this, by people like myself who don't have an intimate knowledge of the Roman Empire, we're quick to say things like, well, the proliferation of LGBTQ ideology in the West very much mirrors, what was happening in the fall of the Roman Empire, where everybody was engaged in butt sex. And that's where my line of intellect stops. I just go, that's what was happening. Definitely. You can read about it, I'm sure. Is there any validity to that? Was there
Yes and no.
Yes and no.
Okay. Yes and no. And because you can even go through history, and Emperor Hadrian was likely doing that, and he actually had a boyfriend that he got pretty upset when he died, and they built a temple to him. And
Hey, it was
that.
just a boy that was his friend. Okay,
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, and it was an insult in like the early Roman Empire to like call someone Greek. So they'd be like, "Oh, Hadrian, he's so Greek," which everybody knew what that meant in that time period. It becomes a lot more acceptable later on. But if you even look at the 3rd century of how you get to where you get to, it's funny because people talk about the debauchery of Rome and things like when it falls, and that's actually not true because by the time it falls, it's a Christian empire. They did the damage during the debauchery period. But they kind of like, I don't know, got prim and proper and did things a little bit differently.
Maybe
But
they
I was
realized too late.
Yeah, well, I guess. But if you look at the 3rd century crisis I was talking about, like you kind of start to see the process happen with Commodus, but it doesn't fully happen until the mid 220s, and you get this emperor named Elagabalus, which, by the way, you guys will love this. He was the priest of a cult that worshipped get this, black rock.
Interesting.
Okay.
Many such cases. Go on.
Yes. So he was a teenage priest of a cult called Elagabalus. There's 2 different names for him, Elagabalus or Heliogabalus, but they've basically worshipped this type of a sun god. And this dude was nuts. He's the only other one other than Commodus to be able that was pulled through the streets of Rome and thrown into the Tiber. So what he does is he sends a painting of himself to Rome ahead of himself when he gets there, of himself like dancing to his black rock. Then when he gets there, he holds a wedding for his black rock where it gets married to another black rock and everyone has to come. He would hold these parties where the instance you were talking about before with butts happens. And he would force the Senate to actually take part in this. He takes his hairdresser, and I just imagine the hairdresser having like this, like, like being like, oh my gosh, hair, puts him in charge of the grain supply. So he actually makes him run all the food of what everyone's eating.
Well, wait a second. This is interesting because as you're describing these things, there's so many. Once again, I just started.
No, it gets better. Dude, it gets better. It gets better. It gets better. So
Let him cook.
So his process of actually like advancing people in jobs was he would make them pull down their pants and see how long their member was, and whoever had the longest member would get the best job. And he tries to marry a Vestal Virgin, but Rome really just won't let that happen, so that doesn't happen. He ends up getting pulled around Rome in a chariot of prostitutes, and supposedly he wanted to be trans, though we don't know that.
Incredible! Wait, he made the prostitutes pull his chariot?
Yes. So then basically they get so they're so much upset with this guy that the Senate's like, all right, this is it. And the Praetorian Guard kills him, and he's drugged through the streets. His cousin/brother, because this whole family tree is a little bit funky, his cousin/brother, Severus Alexander, is going to be the next emperor. And he, once again, is a teenage emperor, but that's kind of the last steady emperor you get before this 3rd century crisis happens. So I guess DEI opened us up to the crisis of the 3rd century.
People, is this just indicative of human nature that we seem to go through these loops? It's like not only does history rhyme, but also today you have people marrying inanimate objects. This all the debauchery that you just described is something that's happening right now.
I see Emp 1990. I think we actually follow each other on X, says in the comments. It's saying it's convenient that he wanted to be trans. That's actually a modern play on that too. So go figure, our historians now are trying to tie themselves to that.
Of course, yeah.
It sounds like what this has in common is like whenever you're consoling with entities, if you're like carrying around a black cube and worshiping the sun, honestly, that sounds like Saturn worship. That Saturnalia that goes to Satanism, and then from Satanism that can be extrapolated down into name your fallen angel. Which one are they worshiping? But it always comes.
I don't know, but many historians call it a conical black rock. So black rock. Go figure.
Yep, yeah, that's it again and again.
Well, that's just some Jewish stuff right now. But black rock, who knows? Who knows who actually owns that? But it always comes back to butt sex. It comes back to fallen angel worship of some type, and then the rest of this debauchery, and it just rhymes every single time.
Yeah, it's kind of wild, man. Because then what ends up happening is it's what ends up happening is you talked about the overcorrection before. So what ends up happening is someone comes in to put in some order, and then things go fully the other way, right? It's an overcorrection, and that's if you look at the third century crisis, it becomes fully about power, where it's literally just military guys trying to kill each other, and that's one of the major instability points that's going to cause the West to eventually fall. Is that it? When they look at the Roman Empire too, historians tend to break it into two parts. They call the first part the Principate. It comes from the word princeps, which is what Augustus would have called himself, or prince is where we get our modern word from, because he didn't want to call himself a king, because the Roman hated kings. In the 280s, when Diocletian takes over, we're using the word dominate. It comes from the word dominus, or lord. It's actually the medieval model for kingship, if you look at a lot of how Diocletian functioned. Whereas during the Principate, people would have actually had access to their emperor. During the dominate, they don't. And if you could look at this third century crisis, it creates such an overcorrection that you go from, I'm not going to say the empire is a great place, but a pretty decent place, to a very brutal place.
We touched on it a moment before, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it a little bit more, but that's where I think we're going. When we talked about the idea of a pressure cooker, right, to suppress masculinity, even, I don't know how much you see it on Twitter, but there is this notion of all of a sudden people calling out Jews for, you touched on the Weimar Republic before, this sort of hidden history aspect. We didn't understand what really happened in Germany, and we, for a long time, have not been able to discuss these peoples. We haven't been able to discuss or express masculinity without it being labeled toxic. I feel like it's a really interesting setup inside of a pressure cooker to join those two things together. And I worry that what we are going to see is like a nice period, but then a dramatic overcorrection. I've been saying that the cultural pendulum, or at least the political pendulum, is certainly about to swing back to, let's say, Republican. But there are cultural connotations that are associated with being Republican, conservatism, and things of that nature. I think that we're going to, right now, it seems we're strapping a rocket to that pendulum, and it's going to swing back in the other direction, away from, liberal to conservatism. And we're going to see, if the LGBTQ community and all the things that happened with that were the left going too far, I wonder what it's going to look like when the right goes too far. And I feel like that is very much what you just described, this overcorrection, is what we're going towards. Do you think that is
Well, then
valid?
That's the concern, because you look at someone like Trump's a moderate. Like, he's a moderate by the normal political spectrum, but it's just everything that's not far left now is far right. And I think what you're going to end up creating by going so hard after someone's a moderate is you create something way, way worse. And I think that's the problem, is they're like, Trump is Hitler, he's Caesar, he's this, he's that. And I think the problem is, by doing that, what you create that comes after Trump could be scary. And I think that's the actual problem, is that overcorrection in that direction, is you can create so much craziness that now we go somewhere else because you have all these other groups that feel like they've been pushed out.
Yeah.
You get what I'm trying to say?
Sort of the vindication of it too. It's like, one, if you push a person against the wall enough and you call them toxic, you call them racist, you call them this and that, well, eventually some people have the proclivity to go, you know what, fine. If I can't reason my way out of these accusations and you're going to put these labels on me anyway, then I'm going to go ahead and be exactly what you're calling me. I think people have a tendency to kind of do that. And I think the other thing is, when you push a guy down like Trump constantly, and then all of a sudden, eventually, he does start to get his W's. He does start to get vindication in one way or another, because what you levied against him is paper thin, it falls apart. And then all of a sudden, the very people launching these accusations get exposed as being terrible themselves. And the culture starts to swing towards this guy. I think vindication of that level can be also very dangerous. So, yeah, I think we are going towards an overcorrection.
And that's really the scary part, is they're creating a situation. And so let's talk about Julius Caesar for a second, because I think history doesn't fully understand him. And what actually creates the fall of the Republic isn't really Caesar. It's actually the people that try to stop Caesar, right? It's the whole idea of like ending democracy to save it. And that's exactly what happened. So Caesar holds the consulship in 59 BC. Consul is kind of like being president, but they would have two at the same time, because they didn't want one person to hold power. and they would hold that power for a year. So the other consul in that year is a guy named Marcus Biblius, but he's kind of like a front man. The guy behind him is this guy Cato the Younger, and he's an enemy of Caesar's. And Caesar, for the most part, was really a populist. There's two political factions during this time period called the optimates, or the great ones, which are the rich people and the Senate, and the populares, which are people that did things more for the popular people. So though Caesar should have been an optimate by birth because he's a patrician, he's broke his entire career. So he's always borrowing money in order to like get to the next political position. So he holds the consulship in 59. The first thing he does is rich people had a tendency to take the public land and just use it as their own farms because, like, I'm rich. What are you going to do? What Caesar tries to do is take that public land and give it to veterans as like a retirement pension. And that gets that gets the Senate really upset. So then Cato and Biblius try to block this. So Caesar actually goes directly to the people and he gets the people to vote for it. So then the people actually chase Biblius into his home, and he doesn't leave his home for an entire year. So they end up calling the consulship, rather than the consulship of Caesar and Biblius, they end up calling it the consulship of Julius and Caesar. Because Caesar is working privately with these two other individuals, Rome's greatest general, Pompey the Great, and Rome's richest man, Marcus Crassus. They call it the first triumvirate. So then after that, Caesar goes to spend 9 years in Gaul as what's called a proconsul, meaning a consul outside of Rome. And he kills about 1 million people in this period of time. So let's not make him, this ultra great populace. But anyway, he's going to come back to Gaul after his proconsulship expires. And if you held one of these political positions, you couldn't be charged with any crimes of any sort. So he hears through the grapevine that Cato, his enemy, is like, so we have these corruption courts, and we've decided you're corrupt, and we've got these crimes, and we're going to charge you with them. So Caesar decides he's going to run for consul again. Rome has a in-person voting system, so he would actually have to show up in person to be voted for. He petitions the Senate to be voted for in absentia. It's approved. Cato gets that blocked, so Caesar still would have to show up in person. So Caesar takes his 10 legions, marches down through northern Italy, leaves 9 of them at this river called the Rubicon, and then takes one of his legions and crosses the Rubicon. And people often say he says, "Oh, the die is cast." It's actually a mistranslation. He was quoting Greek tragedy. It would have just been "Let the chips fall where they may." So then he and his one legion enter the city of Rome, and all of his enemies just run away. They just leave, and they let him have the city. And that is actually how Caesar ends up becoming dictator, is basically they call his bluff, and he's like, well, I got the army, you don't, I'm going to come. And that ends up being how we get there. So I think the problem you end up seeing is often this idea of trying to protect things will, cause the thing you don't want to happen. Sorry for that long explanation.
No, that's am I correct, Top, in saying that's the Streisand effect?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally, that's what's happening right now when it's coming particularly to Trump, in my opinion. It's like everybody is, from the jump, they don't like his language. He's against women. He's against, blacks. He's against Mexicans, all these different things. And I think it's manifesting, manifest destiny or a self-fulfilling prophecy, where it's like you're trying desperately to get this guy out of office, and all it's doing is it's painting the picture for like this incredible comeback story that I think we're in the middle of.
Wasn't there that play of Trump as Caesar getting stabbed? Do you guys recall this, or is this a Mandela effect?
The Shakespeare play?
I forgot what it even was.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. That was in New York, wasn't it? They actually did a play of him being
probably.
That happened. That happened. I don't remember what it's called.
That's fascinating. So
now
they're
you're
already likening to him. It is. So I mean, this conversation is.
Then you have the assassination attempt, which were there multiple attempts on Caesar?
Here you go. This is 2017 from The Guardian. Trump is Julius Caesar play. Overplay misses Shakespeare's point, says scholar. Where did this happen? It happened in New York. Yeah, I can send you this article. This is fun.
That is fun. It's a weird thing. I often wonder when it comes to, because on this show we believe in this sort of a spiritual aspect to all of this, and that is what moves things along. And I wonder if the players on the world stage know the roles that they're playing, or if these things just happen. if they're being moved along in a way by a force that we can't see. I mean, here, you actually have that article. I'd love to see that. Let's bring that up. Oh, they want to give us...
Trump
This is a privacy statement that you don't have to pay for anything.
Trump is Julius Caesar, anger over play misses Shakespeare's point. But yeah, this did happen. I do remember seeing this. There was even a video of at the end.
So it wasn't the
when they
Mandela effect.
No, thank God it wasn't, because I'm like, nowadays.
Not yet.
Can you imagine if they
Yeah.
implanted that one in your head?
Oh,
Interesting.
It's like that movie, gosh, that apparently never happened, Shazam, that I'm so
dude.
convinced is part of my childhood experience, but apparently is not real.
Yeah,
There's tons of
Def
them.
Not Xer in the chat is saying that Shazam. There's a lot of really weird.
I wonder if the Roman Empire had any Mandela effects, or if this is just like a common occurrence.
That I don't know. That takes a much longer time to trace.
Was there a tremendous amount of like drug use, psychedelic use, substance abuse in the Roman Empire? Because it's my understanding there was a lot of that and tied into their culture. And I wonder, if you could trace that sort of thing and say, yeah, towards the end there was much more of a use of these things.
Well, they were just heavy drinkers. A lot of it is also because like they didn't trust water as much during this time period because it wasn't as clean. So you had a better chance of drinking wine and not dying. So like even Mark Antony, who was Caesar's top general and ended up being the guy fighting Augustus at the end of the Republic. Like he was supposedly just drunk all the time. So like there was heavy drinking throughout the entire Republic and Empire because I guess that's just how the culture was. And at the same time, the water wasn't very safe. I went to China a number of years ago, by the way. We carried around a backpack of beer because I did not trust the water. I felt like I was in a safer condition. But there's this cult that actually comes out of, it's a Greek cult. And there's, I'm trying to forget which writer it was. Was it Sophocles that actually writes about it? But anyway, there's a cult that comes out of Greece, and there's actually a play written about it, but they're called the Bacchae. And what they would do is if you leave grapes too long, they get an interesting kind of mold on them. And they would use that mold to make moldy grape wine. And people would just get high as hell and make predictions and stuff.
Interesting.
That does make its way into Rome eventually, but it is initially a Greek cult.
Yeah,
a mold would be like some sort of a fungus. So there's
It's probably a
overlap
psychedelic.
Psychedelic wine. Wow.
right.
That would
And
sell in today's society. That would sell like crazy.
all of my knowledge, my limited knowledge of Greek culture comes from the movie 300. And and in that film, they have a scene where in order to be able to go to war, Leonidas has to consult with the priest class, and then they need to have their muse interact with the spirits. And so this girl has to, take some sort of psychedelics and commune with the spirit realm, and that's where
a
they
lot
get
of
their
times that
information.
was sulfur and stuff like that, because what they would do is they would hold a lot of these ceremonies in caves, and a lot of that stuff is coming out of the walls. So they'd be like, "Oh wow, you go to this place and have a vision." No, you're probably dying.
You're going to that place and literally suffocating your brain, and just on the edge of death, you're having visions. That's more than likely what was happening there. I do want to ask you a quick question, or not a quick question. I think there's going to be a hard pivot. I'm very interested in this. But before we get to the point of it, we're going to run an ad. But the question is, and you can think about this while the ad runs, we have been communicating with somebody who does a Book of Revelation series with us every Friday, Ed Mabry, and he has been talking about this idea that the Roman Empire never truly went away and that it became the Vatican. And so I'll let you cook on that for a little bit, but we're going to run a quick ad. This episode is brought to you by Matt Rife and his team over at RealRifeTechnology.com, the home of the Real Rife machine. A Real Rife machine is an electromagnetic radio frequency device engineered by Dr. Royal Raymond Rife in the 1920s, used to address various health concerns. Unlike imitation devices on the market today, Rife Technology was co-founded by Dr. Rife's relatives and longtime friend of the show, Matthew Rife. Real Rife machines are the cutting edge in wellness technology. I personally own one, and I use it all the time. I like to tune my Real Rife machine to the frequencies that help with addiction, to help curb my sugar cravings. Their Royal Rife machine is recognized as a general wellness product by the FDA. They're great for weight optimization and fitness improvement, mental clarity and cognitive functions, sleep enhancement and mood balance, vitality and sexual functions, digestive health and immune boost, skin radiance and endurance boost, healthy blood pressure maintenance, and more. And while you're on reallifetechnologies.com, be sure to check out the other products they offer and use promo code NEPHILIM for 15% off your entire order. That's promo code NEPHILIM, NEPHILIM, for 15% off your entire order when you visit reallifetechnology.com. Okay, so just to reiterate, this idea, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, that
We
the
wanted
Roman
to know,
Empire...
did they have Rife machines in the Roman Empire?
Did they?
Well,
If
these
they did,
comments,
they would not
these
have
comments
fallen.
are amazing. This person says that the Rife machine cured his parental reliance.
This guy got his gay cured by
That's
the
not
Rife
true.
machine.
I know Scott. He's still gay. It's not a miracle machine, Scott. No. But I do want to get your thoughts on the idea that the Roman Empire never went away and that it actually just turned into the Vatican.
Well, I think the thing you have to consider is this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and it's the idea of power structures. And I think what happens is it's kind of a unique situation where, like where the church was created, that it was created as, part of the Roman state, because in Rome, there's no separation between spiritual and temporal, right? They see spiritual power and temporal power as the same thing. And for them, that was polytheism. And that's why I think it's Pliny the Elder that's actually writing to the emperor about this and trying to explain this. But they didn't quite understand it. Like for Christians, there's a separation between spiritual and the state. And so that's why when you have in the late 240s, when Decius says, oh, you have to sacrifice to the emperor, Christians wouldn't do it. And this becomes a problem then because, well, they see this as a political act, right? They're political revolutionaries. They won't sacrifice to Roman gods and to the emperor. But for them, it was more or less just a religious act. So there's this inability to understand the difference. So then what ends up happening then is in 312, after this battle called Milvian Bridge, Constantine has a vision, and they actually put the Chi and the Rho on shields, and they credit the Christian God with basically being the reason that they win this battle of Milvian Bridge against another emperor claimant, and it makes Constantine the guy in charge. What ends up happening then is about 2% of the empire during this period is actually Christian. Now, what's going to happen is Constantine starts favoring Christians in political positions. So you're going to have people converting to Christianity, and there's questions, well, do they believe it, or are they doing it for political expedience? Once again, we don't know. It's a very long time ago. By 370, you're going to have Christianity becomes the official religion of the empire. So in a little over a 50-year period, the empire totally changes. Now, what's going to happen, as I mentioned, when in the 280s, when Diocletian kind of reconstitutes the empire, a lot of those verbiages like diocese and things like that end up becoming words that the Catholic Church is going to use, because that would have been what people would have understood in their daily lives. Just like when Alexander the Great conquers Persia, he would call the territories controlled satraps, because that's what they called them. So it really ends up being just a cultural changeover of the things that had been uniquely Roman and had been used in kind of the building of this power structure that becomes the church. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I don't think it's really like it transitioned to a church. It's just that this was their culture, this is how they understood it, and this is when they started becoming Christians. That's how they would adopt the verbiage.
So would you agree then with the sentiment that the Roman Empire does live on in some way, shape, or form through the Vatican?
I would say not even just through the Vatican, and like how many forms of government. Like, go to D.C. Like, you look at a lot of those buildings, you feel like you're in Rome or in one of those other areas. So I think that's what you have to consider, is it's become such a big cultural part of our history that I think it lives on in many, many ways. In good ways and in bad, right? Like, if you look at the papacy in the Middle Ages wasn't a very good thing. Just ask the Cathars what happened in the year 1000. But if you look at kind of those Rome as a whole, we do end up using it in so many different ways in our lives.
What do you think about this? Is something that I think we should explore as we kind of reach this 1 hour and 10-minute mark. The transformation of the way that they worship their gods. Because obviously when you go to the Vatican, it's monotheism. But when you talk about their when people think of Rome, it's really polytheism that comes to mind. What did it look like when they were worshiping their gods? What sort of a relationship? Was it something that was not very culturally significant? Is the polytheistic aspect of Roman culture really a backdrop, or were their gods really a tremendous integral part of their culture? And what did that look like for them as far as worship and sacrifice and things of that nature?
It's so interesting to describe because it's so ingrained in everything. It almost feels like a secular polytheism, if that makes sense. Like it's such a big part of everything that it actually doesn't feel like it has an effect on anything. I know that sounds like a mind fuck, but do you get what I'm trying to say? Like it's such a big part of everything. It's almost taken for granted in a lot of ways. So for example, the word inauguration that we use when someone takes office, if you break down the word, augury was basically the study of bird signs. So they would look at the bird signs and they would say, okay, I know we just voted on consuls, but is this a good day for the guy to take office? Let's take a look at the birds. Birds look good. We're good to go. Okay, good. Inauguration. This person's in office. They would also take a look at the livers of animals. And if you go look it up, there's you can actually see a map of the different parts of a liver and what they believe that part of the liver could tell them. And they would open up an animal, cut open the liver, and see if they were getting good portents from that liver. Sometimes they would say, okay, let's just get another liver. That one lied to us. And so it's very often something they're doing. Or even go back to the world of the Greeks, Alexander the Great used to sacrifice a bull before every battle. And that's something that ends up, Augustus ends up making that popular again as the first emperor to actually sacrifice a bull for different things. But what ends up happening is you have kind of your regular Roman gods, but they also import gods of other religions. So Constantine, for example, he becomes a Christian later in life, but he's a big worshiper of a god named Sol Invictus, or the immortal sun, which comes from Egypt earlier in his life. So what would happen is a lot of the conquered territories' gods would come into Rome, and it was perfectly acceptable to worship those gods. And you would really only worship a god on their feast day, which is a very interesting standpoint. A lot of temples might be closed the rest of the year, but open on the feast day of that god. So it's just a very much... That's a funny Alexander the Great comment. It's very much it's kind of like going through the motions, but you have to question, do they believe it,
Right. That's what I meant is is it a backdrop, or is it something that they really adhered to? I do wonder about the lengths of their belief, or the sort of the depths of their convictions when it comes to these entities.
And that's just not something we have enough information on, right? Because it's written from the viewpoint of the historians, and you kind of wish that you lived during the time period to know more about it,
Even if you did, just right now, you're describing, are these people Christians? We have the video of Donald Trump saying, I'm not a Christian, but it looks like he's saying he is, and it's like this Rorschach test of, did he say this or did he say that? The blue dress, the blue and gold dress kind of thing.
Yes.
So we wouldn't even know. And they didn't have the technology that we did to go back and reanalyze this stuff. It was probably very obscure, but the people who took it seriously probably did take it seriously in the background.
And thanks, Zemain is awesome for saying props to this guy for reading our comments and somehow still managing to stay focused. I'm good at doing two things at once, man. I have 3 daughters, so you have to be able to do many things at once because they're running all over the place. And to your Alexander the Great comment, yes, that is true. It's a cultural thing. It was very acceptable in that time period to kind of be doing both things.
Yes, but sex is just cultural. So what I think is interesting is you're talking about inauguration and how it has to do with the birds. And it just started.
Are fake.
And the
They're
birds
all
are
robots.
fake. They're not real. It starts to make me go down this line of thought of they say that this is a Christian nation, right? And I know that the Roman Empire certainly does influence, you alluded to the architecture before, of the West in so many ways. If you go to DC, everything is we have and I know this is Egyptian, but there's a giant obelisk, in Washington, D.C., the pillars on the front of all the buildings, just the architecture of the buildings in general. But for a Christian nation, it seems that the seats of power within America don't hold a tremendous amount called robot sex.
I was laughing at the same thing.
That's a good shirt. That's not a bad shirt. I don't know who's going to wear it.
On my other show, it's a very like heavy. We're talking, and then we address the audience. On Nephilim Death Squad, we sort of address them, but they're getting to a point where they're so funny. Where I'm like, I'm just glad we have a guest that is like, all right, these guys are.
But
being
this is what
ridiculous here,
happens
too.
when you ignore
I
them.
enjoy talking to the audience. They're always funny as hell on a lot of shows I'm on.
They're terrible people, but when you ignore them, they just try to get funnier. And we've been ignoring them on this show for some time, and they're getting funnier.
They paid us for on our last episode, and like if you give a super chat, I'll bring it up on the screen because it's just out of courtesy. But they asked one of our last guests, a black dude, if he could do an entire episode in black accent, and I'm like, I gotta pull it up. I pulled it up. I'm like, these people are running the show. I don't know what to do with them. They need to be in an asylum, really.
And then he did black scent, and it was the funniest shit
then he did
ever.
black accent. Yeah.
And what does 07 mean? Because people keep randomly commenting it.
It's like a waving, like hello,
It's like a salute.
like a
Oh.
salute. Yeah, like a
Okay,
salute.
got it. I just see it randomly popping up every once in a while.
They're animals. But getting back to this sort of architecture that you'll find in the seats of power in the West, oftentimes you would be hard pressed to find Christian iconography, but you can find a lot of Roman and Greek iconography. And
Well, yes and no, because you even look at the Pantheon in Rome. It was originally built as a temple to all gods, and eventually becomes a church. So what I think does happen, you look at the tomb of Hadrian, which is now called the Castel Sant'Angelo. So a lot of, I think at the same time the Christian iconography inherited a lot of this stuff too, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It makes a tremendous amount of sense. We see that throughout history. It's like belief systems melding into other belief systems, and it really kind of obscures the history of things. It makes it very difficult to trace things back because they all sort of bleed into one empire bleeds into another empire. But it's interesting because the idea of inauguration having to do with the birds and the birds, I would imagine the reason they're interpreting them is because those are a mechanism by which the gods would give them signs, right? And so there is a lot of what you would call pagan iconography and pagan tradition that has bled into this idea of the separation of church and state is really an idea.
But even a lot of cultural things too, like these comments are out of control, by the way. Like there are even a lot of cultural things. So like for example, right, carrying your wife across the threshold, right? Like this idea of like when you get married, you pick her up and take her into the house, and you guys just got married. If you actually knew the story behind that, it's like kind of rough, man. So like Romulus, who's the first king of Rome, when he founds Rome, he founds it only with the men and criminals he could find to basically build this city. So what's the problem? They have no women. Well, what if you don't have any women? You don't have a next generation. So they invite the neighboring tribe over called the Sabines, and during dinner, they kidnap and rape all the women. And this is called the rape of the Sabine women. So why is a woman carried across the threshold? Well, because they were carried by the Sabines were carried by the Romans against their will. So a lot of cultural things we do are even kind of scary.
That's so treacherous, dude. And that's also
so
isn't that like,
and women now are just kind of like, oh, he's carrying me across the threshold. Well, if you only knew.
If you only knew.
For rape. Oh my God.
That's so diabolical, dude.
And it's wrong on so many levels, right? Like when you break bread with someone, that's supposed to kind of be like a peace treaty here. Yeah. That's
right. In Christianity, there's a real heaviness to inviting people into your home and hosting people, and what you do to them is supposed to be everything is about respect and charity. And
Roman homes are interesting too, because a lot of like the Roman system, you would call it a client system, meaning like, I have money, you could become my client, I might do some things for you, I might give you better political positions, whatever it might be. So people's houses were often their home. So the further you were let into someone's home showed the kind of higher up you are in the client hierarchy. So that even that perspective is of, how you let people in your home is interesting.
The pantheon of the Roman gods, was it essentially an exact mirror of the Greek pantheon, and what came first? Did they adopt these? It's like Zeus's counterpart would be Jupiter.
Well,
right?
Greek civilization is older than Roman civilization. It's something you have to consider. It's been around a lot longer, and there's quite a few gods that are similar, like Jupiter and Zeus, or Mars and Ares and stuff like that. But there are some that don't match as well. There's some that are borrowed from Greek mythology, and there's some that are just created by the Romans. It's Roman religion is very interesting because it's like the combination of a lot of different things. It's like a kind of kaleidoscope religion, and they have some things uniquely theirs, but they borrow a lot of stuff from a lot of other cultures. The kind of heyday of Athens is during the like mid-Republic era, but for the most part, by the time Rome becomes an empire, Greece has kind of fallen to Alexander the Great, and then the Romans just conquer the remaining empire of Alexander, gradually over time.
What do you think are some things that people really get wrong? Because we've touched on that a lot, and with something as popular as the idea of the Roman Empire, we said that it entered sort of meme culture. I imagine that there is a lot that we're getting wrong. We even said so many of us don't actually know
thumbs up
about
and thumbs
it.
down. Everybody has it backwards. Thumbs up meant to kill him. Thumbs down meant not to kill him.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Interesting. How do we get that one?
So give everyone a thumbs down because that's what you want.
Yeah. I don't want you to die, homie. That is. I just feel like there's we do a thing with history. It's like a game of telephone, and history is written by the winner in many cases, and there are obviously texts and things that you can recover that'll kind of shed some light on the actual nature of the situation. But I think that the West in 2024 is especially unique in our game of telephone in that we are willing to talk about a topic. We arguably have more as individuals, more ability to talk about these things. Thank you for the financial support. Greatly appreciated the Nether Knight. $2 tier for life. But in a time where we have more reach in our messaging, platforms like this, there's a million podcasts out there. Everybody has a soapbox to preach from. But I also feel like in conjunction with that, we are less likely to do our research. And I think that's got something to do with the speed with which our attention shifts. It's like everything is very quick. Everything is very shallow. We're on from one topic to the next. And I feel like now more so than ever, maybe a lot of us are doing the work of obfuscating a topic like the Roman Empire. And I feel like we're getting things more wrong and with a louder microphone than probably ever before.
Yeah. And thank you to Eamon Rat, by the way, that says he gives this interview 2 thumbs down. That's what we're trying to get, man. We don't want to die.
Crushing.
Well, if you want to look at,
you run like a social media, like a not advertising, but like they're gonna build your brand. This guy's all about thumbs down. It's incredible, man.
There you
it's
go,
a very
man.
Confusing message.
Thumbs down. It's what you want. You don't want to have thumbs up. Thumbs up means they could kill you. But the actual biggest thing people get wrong, and there's going to be a lot of historians that hate me from this, because people will debate the fall year of the Roman Empire forever. I hear a dog.
It's my dog.
Is the whole 476 fall of the Western Roman Empire. And you have to kind of understand the last 100 years of Rome is basically barbarian generals just running like ineffective or child emperors. So after 410, after the sack of Rome by Alaric, your final emperor in 476 is a child named Romulus Augustus, and they actually give him a pension and retire him. And the dog said thumbs down. Great, we love that dog. They actually give him a pension and retire him. So Rome doesn't fall. It literally ends because they say, okay, no more emperors. The king is in charge now. So what ends up happening is the Eastern Roman Empire, this guy named Justinian, famous for the Justinian Law Code, and his general Belisarius try to unite Rome. Well, how do you do that? But you burn it down, right? Like you bring in a military and try and destroy the thing and be like, hey, I rule the thing again. So that ends up what ends up happening is Justinian destroys the thing in order to reunite it. Well, there's not as much literacy in the West at this point. So whose history are you going to be reading? You're going to be reading the East's history. And they don't want to make Justinian look bad. So, it fell in 476 because the barbarians, just burned the whole thing down. It really had morphed into a series of self-sustaining barbarian kingdoms. And a lot of former Romans were actually working with barbarians to kind of build this new economy.
That's not something that you hear very often. When you see, we talked about Gladiator before, and this is something that I've kind of been wanting to ask, and it's probably a shallow question, but it's one of my favorite films. I just rewatched it.
It's a
recently.
really good film, man. Like I love 300, but it's not historically accurate.
Well, that I figured, and that is a great movie. I actually watched that with my son recently.
Our Alexander commenter will love that one of the most accurate historical films out there is Oliver Stone's Alexander. But anyway, continue.
Oh, is that the one with
Colin Farrell?
Yeah, and that was accurate.
It's pretty good. Like there are some things they alter, but it's for the most part it honors the story.
Hollywood always embellishes it's for entertainment purposes, but when it comes to Gladiator, which I would say out of the ones that we just mentioned, probably my favorite. And I am worried about what they're going to do with the new one. What I didn't like about it, one of the things that I got into, I made a tweet about it, was that the ambiance in Gladiator, the film, it was contributed to by this original score. And that original score, that musical piece, made you feel like you were immersed in the time era.
I hate that too, that they went with kind of like a different album for the new one.
They went with Jay-Z and Kanye West's Watch the Throne album. Yeah, and I think it was No Church in the Wild was the song in the preview. And look, it's a preview, so maybe they're not going to utilize that. But I think that I
heard they even put smoke detector chirps inside of the Coliseum.
No, that's not true. I don't think they did that. I don't think that's true. That's actually misinformation. But I just worry that they're going to, you said it's like Training Day, right? Like you're worried that they're going to go in that direction. The best films, oftentimes the best films have their own musical score. So I'm just confused as to why you would do this sort of, did you hear that? Why you would do that sort of a thing and pull from modern day music, because the idea is to suspend your disbelief and be immersed in the story. And I don't want any kind of like cultural things that I can relate to, like, this Jay-Z song. But that being said, when it comes to the original film Gladiator, what did they get wrong in that film?
Well, one of the bigger things is like how the forum would have actually looked. You could if you guys look it up on YouTube, you can kind of see different, or on X or on these different places, you can see what they actually would have looked like. But they kind of mixed up some time periods, and I think that's what you see in a lot of these movies is kind of just time periods, kind of slipping on the track. So that's a big one. Is the forum would have looked different. Commodus likely didn't fight Maximus in the though he is, as I said, strangled by a wrestler named Maximus later on. That's where they probably get the name from. That likely doesn't happen. Commodus doesn't kill Marcus Aurelius, so that's
he didn't hug him to death.
No, and like Aurelius is like most of his career fighting a northern tribe called the Macromani, so that is very realistic. But there's a number of like kind of small minutia points you could go to on this, but it's a good movie overall. The new one I haven't seen.
Is it out?
It may be. I don't know. I'm just kind of like there's some historical points I've already kind of taken, a problem with. Like the first being the emperor they try to portray as Caracalla, and Caracalla wouldn't have been this blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy with silver teeth or whatever the hell they do to him. He was Semitic, so he was actually would have been born in the area of like Phoenicia or northern Africa. So he would have been much, much darker skinned, not quite black, but much, much darker skinned and a different look. And he was also a military commander. The name Caracalla actually comes from the famous cloak he used to wear all the time. And they try to make him look like this like pretty boy, spoiled guy, when he probably was a brutal dude in actuality. So I think that portrayal is a little weird. They try to portray Denzel Washington as Macrinus. Once again, I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know how accurate they are with this, but Macrinus would have been the Praetorian prefect under Caracalla, and is actually part of the group of people that ended up killing Caracalla. Now, he doesn't precede Caracalla immediately after that, but Macrinus will eventually become emperor for about 9 months.
Okay. So what you're saying is on that front, that's not... It seems like they could be going in the correct direction.
Yeah, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but I haven't seen the new movie enough to kind of have a basis to compare it.
Do you have any interest in seeing it? Are you going to see it?
No, believe it or not, the same thing you said about the soundtrack, that actually really turned me off, because I'm like, oh, man. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you see one of those movies and you want it to feel epic.
Yeah.
And if you take away the soundtrack, like, that takes away the epic. You know what I mean? Like, Star Wars was great because John Williams did the soundtrack,
Yes, exactly. Lord of the Rings was great because of the sound. So many of these, Gladiator was fantastic because of the soundtrack. There's a scene at the end where they are carrying his body as he is drifting away into death, and he's having visions of moving through that wheat field, going to see his family. And when he passes away, and everyone gathers around him to lift him up, it then transitions into a scene with the black guy who basically became his best friend, through hell. And he is burying the clay figurines of Maximus's family and saying, one day we will meet again, not now, but one day. And their use of music and the transition from one song, I think it was like called The Wheat, to another song. I forget what the name of that song was, but it was indicative of like there was a sadness, and then there was this homage to his life with this Power soundtrack, and then it rolled back into the sadness, but it was a little bit more uplifting with his friend. It was a masterful use of it.
It sticks the movie culturally too to
Yes.
change the soundtrack. Do you know what I mean? Like if you can watch a lot of great movies that were made from the 60s till now, like like the original Caesar movie and stuff like that, because the soundtrack, it's not stuck in any era. Like you watch this movie 10 years from now, and it's a movie that shouldn't be dated is now going to be dated.
Yes, exactly. That's the problem.
It's Black Annie is what.
Yeah, or
That's what they did.
I do want to ask you one more question, and
one of the comments first asked if Roman Empire had Red Lobster. Well, and soon no one will have Red Lobster.
That's right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that's
Endless
right.
shrimping. They were
That's what
endless shrimping
happens.
too hard,
I think
bro.
that would, in very many ways, endless shrimping is what destroyed the Roman Empire. But
I was told we had unlimited shrimp. I'm like,
unlimited
no,
shrimp.
sir.
I don't understand. The last one I want to ask you, and Top, I don't know if you have any questions after this, but when it comes to Maximus himself, I know it's like all of a sudden this is about the film, but I love the film, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on like his character as a historical figure.
I don't know really what they would have based him on, honestly. So I don't know. Like he's kind of probably a kaleidoscope of different characters they put together, because that would be typical for people in the military in like other countries and things to serve in it, or maybe if you went into debt in Rome, you could serve as a gladiator. But honestly, he just seems like a combination of a lot of different people. So I don't know what to say he's based on.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? Like, there's different movies you can look at. I was trying to think of one recently I saw where they actually based somebody on two characters. But anyway, go ahead.
No, but I that's interesting because you would look at that film and you would imagine, without having done any research, that this was an impactful historical figure. And really, the idea that he's an amalgamation of, probably the experiences of a lot of people and then embellished to a
you know what
degree.
movie it was? The new Oppenheimer movie. There was a few characters in that movie that were like amalgamations of what people they didn't know what to do with or what to explain. So like it is liberty that they often take in Hollywood.
Okay. It's almost a little bit sad.
Yeah.
That Maximus wasn't really a dude. Damn. That's a somber note to leave this on.
Just messed up his whole day.
Just ruined
sorry,
it for
man.
me, dude. Just ruined it. Unbelievable. Top, do you have anything else, or is this a good place to land it?
I think it's a good place to land it, man. Thank you for coming on. I want you to tell the people again one more time where they can find you and what they can do to help you out.
Well, I think the number one thing that we can do is have conversations like this, because it's what gets us more grounded and what gets us, more out there. And so if you're a business owner, or if you're somebody looking to get a message out, that's what my company does. So if you check out commandyourempire.com, I put together a great resource for people looking to get the word out and looking to get their message out. They want to check me out. I am Jeremy Ryan Slate on every platform, not because I'm a serial killer or a presidential assassin or anything like that. My parents named me after an actor, so I had to use 3 names to get found in Google. So I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate everywhere.
You know what? This picture here does look like if they were like, hey, Jeremy Ryan Slate assassinated the president, and I saw this picture, I'd be like, probably.
Yeah,
He probably
makes
did
sense.
it.
Is it the
Makes sense.
mustache? I get it's the mustache. No one's indifferent on it. They either love it or hate it.
I think
it's-
there's no middle ground.
It's the muscles under the suit that make you look like a dude who could have choked out. You could have been the wrestler that choked out the Roman Emperor. Guys, don't forget, this Friday we are releasing the tickets to Bohemian Grove in Summerfield, Florida, October 25th through the 26th. It's a 2-day event. Come see performers like Leonardo Joni. I believe Revenge of the Sis says that they're coming. Tower Gang, Nephilim Death Squad, the One-on-One podcast, Thomas the Paranoid American. We now have Cashman, Shane Cashman is coming over. A lot of people are coming to hang out. And so Donut, what up, Donut, is also coming. It's going to be a banger. If you want, Clint's going to be there, Josie, the redhead libertarian. If you want to be a part of the fun, then you have to be a member at patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad. Our paying Patreon members are going to get first dibs on the tickets, and after a week, they go to the general public, and they're going to move real fast. So if you want to make sure that you have a seat there, be a member at patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad. Other than that, I think that's it, Top. I don't got nothing.
Yeah, pretty excited about that. I can't believe that this is actually coming together. But
yes,
it is somehow. So get there if you can.
if you can. I know for a lot of people, Florida is a trek, but I don't know where else you're going to go and find this many conspiracy theorists and political commentators and comedians and everything all together in one spot. So I think it's well worth the trek.
All right, guys. We're back on Friday with Ed Mabry for the Revelation series. That's part something. 12,
That's
13,
right.
I don't remember.
And also, guys, timeline cleanse later on today, so come hang.
Don't watch that show. See you guys later. Watch Tower Gang. Peace out.
The greatest hypnotist on planet Earth is a oblong box in the corner of the room. It is constantly telling us what to believe is real. If you can persuade people that what they see with their eyes is what there is to see, you got them. Because they'll laugh in the face of an explanation that portrays the bigger picture of